Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourished, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and I'm also the owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach any of your healthcare goals at just about any body size. So if you are ready to let go of that toxic cycle that is dieting or shaming yourself for eating or not appreciating your own body for what it can do, come join us. Even if your goal is to lose weight, we can help you do it in a nourishing and sustainable way so that you actually keep it off and maintain it for the long haul. And if your goal is not to lose weight, that makes me even more excited because that means we get to delve into what your relationship with food is like, what your relationship with your body is like, and how I can help you to become your best, fullest, most nourished self without having to worry about trying to shrink yourself. So join us. All of our information, as always, is in the show notes for you. We have lots of options for you to interact, everything from like our elite one-on-one counseling, all the way down to just like downloadable things that are some of which are free, some of which are, for a very small fee, courses, meal planning, guidance, all of that kind of stuff. And then of course, all of our socials are there for you to interact with as well. So give it a look and kind of let us know what you see and what you like, and let us know how we can help you. It has been a bit of a hiatus. So I know that, those of you who listen regularly I've probably been wondering where I have been for a while. This podcast is still a thing. It very much is. There's just been a couple of life updates and a couple of delays. The biggest delay was unfortunately a bout of COVID that struck our house in early August. It hit me. It hit my husband. We're both honestly still probably a little fatigued from it, but we're getting there. We're getting back to life as usual. Work has been busy. Most of you know I have a full-time job outside of running this practice. That has been exceptionally busy and has been taking a lot of really more my mental energy rather than my time. But the more mental energy I have to dedicate to my full-time job, unfortunately, the less time and energy I have to create content for you all. And then, as some of you know as well, I am working towards a private pilot license, which is no small feat. I think I went into it thinking that it was going to be a lot easier than it is, and it's really really hard. And I'm getting kind of to a place where I'm kind of like starting to check off boxes for certain things, and stuff has to be done on a certain timeline. So it's becoming a bit overwhelming, although I know that that's kind of a season of it that will pass. So thank you for bearing with me and your patience. I do have over the next couple of months, a couple of really great guests that are coming on the pod. So I'm so excited to share all of that with you. I'm also feeling a lot more inspired, just in terms of my mental and physical energy. So the stuff that I will create, that's just me. I'm excited to talk to you about that too. So we've got a really kind of strong lineup, honestly, for the rest of 2023. So I'm really excited about that. And then of course it is, as always, never too late to join our community called The Cauldron. If you are listening to this podcast and you just absolutely love everything you hear, if you follow me on social media and you're like, wow, like I would really love to interact, but like I don't have any like specific questions or like specific goals that like I really need like one-on-one counseling for, the Cauldron may be a really good place for you. It's built as a community. So it is right now, it is still $50 for the remaining 3 months of 2023. That price will go up in 2024. So you get 3 months of programming at a very, very low cost. It will go up to $25 a month, beginning in 2024. What you get with a Cauldron membership is you get access, first of all, to a Facebook community group that I'm a part of and that I run and operate. So you have kind of access to me through that. You get access to your other group members. It's just kind of an anti-diet, really like an anti-diet, community. So kind of folks who may or may not be working on weight loss. I mean, I think everybody in the group right now actually has different goals on that front, but the beauty of it is that we're all kind of coming at it from this anti-diet, weight inclusive, healthy at every size type of viewpoint. And the beauty of that is that it's just kind of a place on the internet, which is rare, that we're not preaching, any type of diet culture. We're not preaching any of the fad diets. We're not preaching any of the lose this amount of weight by this amount of, this amount of time. Like there's none of that there. It's very much grounded. Everything in there is evidence-based. People ask lots of questions about kind of, is this real? Is this not real? And it's a really good place to get evidence-based answers to those questions from an RD. If they're deep enough dives, then we talk about them on our monthly group calls, which is another benefit. And in some cases, even I design workshops around them. So that's the third and final benefit of the cauldron, is that you get quarterly workshops for free. Those workshops are available to the public, so they're open to anyone, but as a cauldron member, you get it for free. So normally they would be paid for, or something that you would have to pay for, and you certainly can still access them that way. If you are a cauldron member, you get access to all upcoming workshops, but also any archived workshops as well. As soon as you join that membership, you have access to everything that's been done already. So that's kind of a really nice benefit. Our upcoming workshop is going to be on September 22nd. It is going to be about body image. So again, that was a topic that came directly out of our monthly group calls. It just kind of what to do. Where does body image come from? How do we fix it? What to do on days that you have bad body image, kind of how to muddle through the world of media and social media that, are constantly kind of portraying this like thin ideal, but also, all of the ways to theoretically get there, what to do with all of that, etc. So that's kind of what our focus will be on the 22nd. You certainly can register for it on your own, but there is also the opportunity to join the cauldron as well. So check that out. You get, like I said, access to the Facebook group community. You also get the option to join our monthly calls and also view recorded calls if it's not something you're able to join live. And then you get access to those workshops, like I mentioned. So really pretty good deal, even with $25 a month. So it is, again, right now it's a steal, but that will not remain the case. So get in while the getting's good, before, we start charging what it's probably actually worth. So that was a lot of marketing and a lot of catch up. And I appreciate you all kind of taking the time and the patience to listen to it. But what I wanted to talk to, kind of sink our teeth into today is something that I get questions about, honestly, all the time from many patients who walk through my doors. And that is kind of, how do I read the nutrition facts label? Right? What does this mean? How do I discern certain things? What is this telling me, etc. I thought, just because this is also a YouTube channel, I thought about pulling it up and kind of visually walking you through one, but I thought that might be a disservice to the folks who are just listening through audio and don't have the visual component to it. But also I think we can do a kind of a pretty good job if you have kind of, as we are going through these things, if you have something at your disposal where you have kind of like something that has a nutrition facts label on it, you can kind of look and reference certain things. You can also, if you're like listening at work or on a computer, you can pull up just a sample label or something like that and kind of follow along. Or pull one up on your phone if you're kind of traveling. Don't look at one if you're driving. Please don't do that. But otherwise, if you want to pull up just kind of a random sample label, that will kind of help you guide through what we're going to talk about. So first things first, I think it's important to understand what the nutrition facts label is and what it's not. So the nutrition facts label, so the actual little box that says nutrition facts, that is actually the only part of any food packaging that is regulated by the FDA. It was mandated by the FDA somewhere back in the 90s. It came out of, I can't remember which president, but it came out of like some health promotion initiative out of the White House to, if Americans knew what was in their food, they would be able to inherently make better food choices. That was the goal. Unfortunately, it has done pretty much nothing but cause massive confusion and give fear mongering Instagram influencers the ammo they need to basically make you scared to eat anything. So even as a dietitian, I think it is a tool that maybe is helpful for some folks, but to be honest, in my own life, in my own practice, I don't read them at all. And outside of like very specific disease states, I generally don't recommend that my patients do either. Which may sound super counterintuitive coming from a dietitian, but I think frankly, they do more harm than good. I think they create more confusion. I think the goal behind it is good. And I think the intention behind it is good, but the execution has been very poor. And unfortunately, in multiple efforts of trying to reform it and kind of make it more clear, they've only made it worse. So I just don't think it's the beneficial tool that it was designed to be. That said, I'm happy to talk you through it as well. But like I said, I just also want to be very clear that like the nutrition facts label, the little box that says nutrition facts and the ingredients list that is right below it, those are the only two things on an entire package of food that are FDA regulated and therefore true, or at least have to be true and it's legally binding if they are not true. So for example, the things on the nutrition facts label have to be tested in a lab. And if anybody finds out that those things are not true, the company can be sued. The product has to get pulled off the shelves. They have to redo the studies, et cetera. That goes for the ingredients list as well, with the obvious concern being that, food allergens are rampant and you can't have people eating things that they know are they're allergic to. That's kind of the big concern there. So what is listed on the ingredients list has to be true. And what we're going to talk about is how much stock you should put into kind of certain ingredient types and like whether or not they're bad for you. That's kind of a big, Instagram, TikTok, whatever, social media debate right now. So I'll kind of give you my take on that as we go through it. But basically, so if you've got a nutrition facts label pulled up, I'm going to kind of walk you through what everything means from basically the top to the bottom. And then we'll kind of, when we get to the bottom, we'll get to that ingredients list as well. So first things first, you probably see on the top of the label is the serving size. I tell people this is important, but it's also not. This basically dictates what the rest of the label is telling you. So when you see the nutrition facts and the serving size is, for example, half a cup, right? That means that everything below that, so the amount of calories, the amount of fat, the amount of carbs, protein, etc., all of that is for that half cup. Okay. That does not mean that you have to stick to half a cup. And I think this is where food companies are both deliberately deceitful, and it can also be very confusing. So the FDA did kind of revamp the food labels a little bit to where now the serving sizes are a little bit more realistic, but a really big tactic that they employed for a long time was that, for example, if you were to, get out a carton of ice cream and look at it, the serving size would literally read on there half a cup, whereas like most people are not eating half a cup of ice cream. Most people are eating a cup and a half or more of ice cream. So the food company would but at first glance, you may not see that serving size. You may not process how small that actually is. So you look at it and then you look at the calories and it might say something like 120 calories. And you think, oh, well, that's not that bad. But the misconception is that it's 120 calories for what you are actually eating, which for most people, let's just say is a cup and a half, when the reality is that is triple what the serving size on the label is, if that makes sense. So it's something to pay attention to because, again, and food companies do still do this. It's just a little bit more tightly regulated. Is that another prime example is that you would buy, say, a 20-ounce bottle of Coke, but the serving size on the and you look at that, you look at calories on that, you assume that those calories are for the entire bottle, when the reality is the serving size listed may actually be 8 ounces, which is, again, a fraction of what that bottle is. So you need to double or triple the calories and everything else on the label to meet the serving size that you're actually eating. That said, I think it also goes the other way. I think that people get in their head that they have to stick to the serving size, or that's the amount that you quote unquote should eat. And that's not true either. That's just kind of the example. All that is a standard, and it's telling you that everything below this label, so the amount of calories, the protein, the carbs, all of that is for this size serving. You can eat as many servings as you want. And you just, if you are counting calories or macros or something like that, you need to do the math to multiply it out. But that said, you're allowed to eat more than one serving of something. that is okay to do. And like I said, in some cases, the serving size is very deliberately small so that the food company can be somewhat deceitful in their reporting. So I think it's kind of important to recognize that the serving size isn't necessarily a gauge of how much you should be eating, but it's also important to be careful to pay attention to how much you actually are eating, because the serving size may not match what you're actually eating. Moving on down. So next we have the amount of calories, which I think is probably the thing people pay attention to the most. And to be honest with you, out of everything on that label, I probably care about that the least. Calories are just a unit of energy, right? So, if you are trying to gain weight or lose weight, you may be paying attention to calories, because, calories in, calories out is a thing. That said, lower calorie options are not necessarily better for you. They're not necessarily better for you in terms of that might not be the thing that meets your needs. It also may not be the thing, because they've made it lower calorie, and we'll get to this when we kind of talk about sodium and stuff like that. That just because it's lower calorie doesn't mean that they have an offset. They're trying to get the same flavor from something else, right? So sometimes they've added sugar or they've added salt or something to the effect of where to try to make it taste the same with fewer calories, they've modified it in a way that's actually less helpful than if you ate the full calorie variety. That said, I think it also, and this is where Weight Watchers drives me nuts, right? Because the Weight Watchers point system is nothing fancier than just a glorified, modified calorie counter. Like, that's all it is. So things like almonds or nuts that are high in calorie, but also super high in nutritional value, meaning that they have tons of good stuff for you, are almost like demonized because they're high calorie or high quote unquote points, where in reality, that's actually a much healthy or better alternative than to say maybe like a potato chip, which is lower in calorie, but far less nutrient dense. Now, I'm not bashing potato chips. I love potato chips and they're fine to eat. But in terms of like nutritional value, even though they're lower calorie, they're actually less nutrient dense compared to like an almond or a nut. So people are kind of like comparing salty snacks and all they're focused on is the calories or the Weight Watchers points, which are literally the same thing. Then you may be inclined to say, I'm going to do the potato chips because those are lower calories, lower is better, as opposed to the nuts, which are actually higher in calorie, but also much more nutrient dense. So I think that's one that there's so much nuance in that. That's like one very small example. There are thousands of others. So I think it's important to kind of, take all of that with a grain of salt, pun intended. That it's important to maybe be aware of the calories, but to me, that is like far from the most important thing on that nutrient label, which is unfortunate because it's also like in the biggest print, right? So I think, calories are important, but not all calories are the same. So I think we'll kind of talk through that as we get through the rest of the label. The next thing that is listed after the calories is typically the fat. And the way most of your macronutrients are going to be listed on the food label is that the total is going to be bolded, and then the percentages based on different varieties of things like fat and carbs is another one, are going to be kind of indented and in a non-bolded font. So I think that is something that in and of itself is something that trips people up. So for example, if you are looking at a package of nuts, right, you might see that there's a total fat and then there's a number, but then there's something like monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, saturated fat, trans fat, etc., all listed below it. And I think it gets very confusing for folks because there's numbers associated with all of those. So they assume that like, oh, there's total fat, but then there's like this much monosat. Like, what does that mean, right? So basically what it is telling you is that the total is honestly the number that I pay attention to the most. And what that is going to tell you is kind of total out of all of the different kinds of fat. So, there's monounsaturated fat, polyunsaturated fat, saturated fat, and trans fat are probably the big ones that are listed. Of those, of those varieties, like, your total is kind of all of that combined. So you don't need to kind of go through and look at the total fat and then add in every other line item. It's more of those line items are just delineating what portion of the total is coming from that particular type of fat. And the same thing happens with carbs, et cetera. So I think it's very confusing, but I tend to look at those bolded numbers more, because that, again, we're using this as a quick reference. It is not something you should spend more than, I probably should have said this at the beginning, but it is not something you should spend more than like not even 2 minutes. Like, I would say you should not, frankly, spend more than 30 seconds looking at a food label. It may take you a little bit longer than that once you kind of like know what they mean. To kind of get your bearings with them, so to speak. But you should not be looking at a food label or comparing food labels for more than 30 seconds. If you are doing it for more than 30 seconds, you are over analyzing it. And the fact of the matter is, it doesn't matter that much. It just doesn't. So I think that's something that's really important to kind of emphasize as well, is that like, you should not be looking at these for more than 30 seconds. Maybe a minute, maybe 2 minutes if you're like brand new to it, but you really should not be analyzing it hard enough to look at it that long. At that point, they're similar enough. You're splitting hairs. It doesn't matter. Go. It should be a very kind of quick reference guide. So again, that's why I don't look at the non-bolded stuff, because like, I don't have time to look at it. It's much more, and granted, I probably know what it says beyond what without having to look at the label, but looking at your different kinds of fat, to be specific, are polyunsaturated. So any type of unsaturated fat. So polyunsaturated fat and monounsaturated fat. Those are your healthy fats. Saturated fat and trans fat are your bad fats. That said, trans fats really don't exist in foods anymore. They are naturally occurring in a very, very small amounts in very, very few foods. But the FDA actually banned them completely in 2016. So they are not added into foods at all anymore. In 2016, I think was when the ban took place. They had up to like 2 years, I think, from that time to basically reformulate everything and pull everything out of the food. But at this point, it's 2023. Like, they're gone. They're not going to be in foods intentionally anymore by the food company. Like I said, the nutrition facts label is legally binding, and the FDA does go after people for this. So I think it's pretty safe to say that if there's no trans fats listed on the label, there's no trans fats in the food. There may be very minuscule amounts, but you can also kind of rest assured that those are naturally occurring and not harmful. So I wouldn't even look at trans fats. This kind of goes back to my soapbox in the beginning about how it's actually the nutrition facts label and the ingredients list are the only parts of it that are like legally binding. So other things that people will put on the food label are things like trans fat or like zero trans fats, etc., which frankly does not have to be true. Like, that doesn't have to be a true statement unless it's in that little box. They can print whatever the fuck they want on it. That said, zero trans fats, like I said, the FDA told food companies that they had to get rid of trans fats in 2016. So if something says, trans fat free or zero trans fats on the front of the package, it's true, but it's also like, duh, because everything has to be fucking trans fat free at this point, right? So it's just a marketing gimmick. That's all it is. Other big things that companies will put on the front of their packaging to kind of lure you in or draw you, like, they might say something like low sugar or sugar free, which again will be evident on the nutrition facts label, but it could be something like bacon. It's like, no fucking shit, it's sugar free, like, it's bacon. They can also be say things like gluten free, which again, like, it might be rice, like, no fucking shit, it's gluten free. Also, gluten free doesn't mean healthier, but that's a topic for another day. They also may say things like natural, quote unquote. Natural means nothing. There's no formal definition of the word natural. And granted, if it's on a package, it's probably like been altered in some way. So it probably isn't natural. It's literally just a made up word for marketing purposes. It has no formal meaning and certainly has no bearing on the nutritional value or content of that food. So that was a bit of an aside from earlier, but Again, the trans fats are gone, so don't worry about those. Saturated fat is worse for you than the unsaturated fats, but again, like it's not the end of the world. Generally speaking, you want less than 10% of your total calories to come from saturated fat. So what that means in grams is going to vary depending on what your calorie goals are. That kind of brings me to the point of the percentages, kind of as we're looking down our nutrition facts label. There are percentages on the side. And I think people get really lost in the weeds in terms of, do I look at the numbers in terms of grams or milligrams, or do I look at the percentages? What do those mean, et cetera? I personally, and I know lots of dietitians who I actually trust a lot, who actually have an opposite take from me on this. So I don't want to say that one is right and one is wrong. What I'm going to tell you is kind of what I do and why I do it this way, but I'm also going to give you their kind of the flipped version of it. And what I want you to do is use whichever one works better for you, because frankly, it's the same information. I just personally find this to be a little bit more kind of streamlined and easy to understand. So I personally actually don't look at the percentages. I think they're not helpful. Most of my patients are not on it. So basically the percentages are, if you were to be on a 2,000 calorie diet, you need a certain amount of protein, a certain amount of carbs, a certain amount of fat, a certain amount of cholesterol, a certain amount of vitamin A, et cetera, in your diet to kind of make those 2,000 calories that you're eating nutritionally complete. So it's kind of like on an ideal day, if you eat 2,000 calorie diet, these are the percentages of like what you would want to eat from these various components that are listed on the food label or the nutrition facts label. I personally don't think that is helpful because there's so many ifs about that to me, the percentages for most people actually don't really reflect what they should be doing. So most of my clients are not on a 2,000 calorie diet. And I think, even if they are, or it's close, the idea of like where their percentages should be for different things, frankly, may be different depending on their goals. It also kind of gives this idea that like you're supposed to have kind of like these perfect percentages. And to me, I think that is just, it gets too detailed. It's too nitpicky. And it's just really not helpful. That said, I have lots of other dietitians who think people get lost in the weeds, kind of reading through the grams and the milligrams, and they think, but that is in fact too confusing, because that's kind of then asking you, well, like, this has 10 grams of fat. Is that a lot or a little? And I think, so they refer them intentionally to the percentages, even if their calories aren't supposed to be 2,000 calories per day. They will guide their patients to the percentages, because that kind of answers that, is it high, is it low? Because 10 grams of fat could be 50% of your daily value. It could also be like 4% of your daily value. So I think, so some people think that the percentages are helpful in that way. And again, I don't think that there's a right or a wrong. I just, this is how my brain works and why I teach it this way. I also almost always give most of my patients their macro, so they know that 10 grams of fat compared to the 60 they maybe are supposed to eat in a day, that is a pretty moderate portion. That's something that they want to eat, and so forth. So either way, the percentages are helpful, I think, for kind of, again, that very quick glance of like, I don't know what 10 grams of protein means, but I do know what a percentage of like what I'm supposed to eat in a day means. So certainly use either one of those numbers. And again, we're kind of just going through the basics of it. So that's fat, right? Next up are going to be things, and again, every food's a little different just because food contains different things, but next are going to be things like cholesterol and sodium. Cholesterol, to be honest with you, probably should be taken off the food label. We know now that like direct eating of cholesterol, frankly, doesn't really impact your body cholesterol. It, it, it does and it doesn't, right? There's a lot of genetic factors. There's a lot of overall dietary factors. The fat, honestly, the saturated fat probably directly impacts your cholesterol a lot more than the cholesterol. So frankly, I tell people, even if you have high cholesterol, don't waste your time looking at the cholesterol. That's not helpful. I don't even think it should be on there. I'm not going to waste any more time talking about it. But I think, very often if you're told by a doctor, hey, you have high cholesterol, the first thing you start looking at on food labels is the cholesterol. cholesterol. And frankly, that's not helpful. It's a natural thought process, but it's not really going to get you there. The saturated fat, if anything on that food label, is probably the thing to pay attention to. But honestly, I would work with a dietitian to really get a clearer understanding of kind of where in, so much of this is individualized too. It's always about the broader nutrition pattern. We're going to talk a lot about this in a minute, but it's much more about that big picture and not so much about the amount of saturated fat or cholesterol, for that matter, in an individual food that you were eating. Unfortunately, there is no individual food that you can either eat or avoid that's going to kind of make that cholesterol magically better. It's a very much a big picture, and like factoring in all of the components of the things you regularly eat in a day, the things you regularly don't eat in a day, how you move your body, stress, smoking, all of those, alcohol, all of those kinds of things. So I always tell people, honestly, don't pay attention to the cholesterol. But if you have high cholesterol and you're worried about a nutrition standpoint, talk to a dietitian. We're the people that can kind of pull all of those pieces together for you. I think a lot of times the misconception with nutrition is like, oh, like, duh, I should just like know what to do, or there's so much information on the internet, I can just do it myself. Yeah, there's a ton of information on the internet. Half of it's wrong, and the other half contradicts itself. So we're the people that can kind of put that into perspective, translate it into what it means for you, and give you a plan that is going to work for you. We're also going to be able to assess you and your normal habits, and again, kind of generate that plan with the research and with what we know to be true, and cipher out the bullshit, and get you that plan that's really going to work for you. Yes, you're paying for us, but it makes your life a hell of a lot easier, and you're fully confident that you're doing the right thing. And it doesn't necessarily, for something like that, it may not take very many visits. Sodium, it's worth paying attention to, but again, I think people's perception of sodium is kind of like calories, that we should be doing low sodium everything. And like the reality is that isn't necessarily true. As long as you have working kidneys and adequate water intake, your kidneys are going to filter out the excess sodium that you need. Now, like, do we want to be like loading ourselves up with this stuff? No. But by and large, even packaged or processed foods, which again do not have formal definitions, they're kind of like banned as, branded as being like these unhealthy, like sodium laden options. And like, yeah, sometimes they have more sodium to be shelf stable, but that's not as much sodium as something like a restaurant meal or fast food or things like that, which is where people really do tend to get in trouble with sodium. So again, sodium, it's worth paying attention to, especially if you have high blood pressure or like kidney problems, things like that. Certainly, again, if you have any of those conditions, I highly recommend that you talk to a dietitian, because again, we are going to look at what sodium is one of those things, whether you're worried about your blood pressure or your kidneys, it is going to be a daily total type of deal, right? So again, there's going to be no one singular food that is going to be good or bad. It's going to be an overall trend, and it's going to have to take into account all of the foods that you eat in a day and what you eat on a regular basis, day to day, week to week, month to month, etc. Not what you eat incidentally here and there. So I think it's important to pay attention to things like sodium, but I also don't think it's like the end all be all, like you have to buy low sodium everything either. Again, just to kind of give you guidance, things that are kind of considered lower sodium are going to be like less than that 20% daily value if you're looking at the percentages, or less than 300 grams if you're looking, I'm sorry, less than 300 milligrams if you're looking at the milligrams. Generally speaking, we recommend about 2,300 grams of sodium, 2,300 milligrams of sodium, not grams, 2,300 milligrams of sodium per day. So about 2 grams. So again, if depending on what it is, right? So if it's like a bag of chips, you want that to be a fairly low percentage, because that's a very low percentage of what you're eating throughout the day. If it is something like a frozen meal, like a healthy choice or a lean cuisine or something like that, it may say like something as high as like 30 or 40% of your daily value of sodium, but it's also like a whole meal, right? Like it's a third of what you're potentially eating that day. It's okay for that to be to an extent higher in sodium. So I think it's kind of important to notice that. It's also, don't assume that everything in the freezer section is high in sodium. Like really start looking, because things like frozen vegetables, frozen fruits, even a lot of frozen entrees really aren't that high in sodium. So it's something to kind of, again, pay attention to, but also if you have concerns about it, if you have high blood pressure, if you have kidney problems, talk to your dietitian, or find a dietitian and talk to them. That we are the experts are going to kind of help accumulate all of this and kind of show you what 2000 milligrams of sodium in a day actually looks like. And it's probably going to be a lot more liberal than you think. I think people who are told to do low sodium or reduced sodium diets think that like they basically shouldn't touch sodium with a 10-foot pole. And that's simply not the case. Like you need sodium and you're going to eat it. And you just kind of want that confidence to eat it safely and know what you can do. So again, come to us. We're the experts. Carbs are up next. And again, this is another one like fat. There's the bolded total carbohydrate, which is basically what I tell people, even if you are counting carbs, which you do not have to count carbs if you are trying to lose weight. You may have to count carbs if you have diabetes. I get that. But if you are counting carbs with diabetes, look at that total. I don't care what the rest of it says. Okay. We are looking at that total. That's the number to count. There's lots of stuff out there that says you can subtract out the fiber and blah, 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 blah. You can. That's not incorrect, but it's mental math that you don't have to do. It takes away from this like looking at it for 30 seconds. When that is what is meant by net carbs. So net carbs traditionally in food labels means the total carbohydrate minus the fiber. So now with a kind of like this new wave of like keto and things like that, it's making things a lot trickier to understand. Basically, the reason why they get away with it is fiber it's a carb, but it's not a carb that your body can digest. So it's a carb that your body essentially just goes right through you. It does make you feel fuller. It's good for your GI tract. Like fiber is a good thing. Fiber is our friend. But the kind of in this new age of like keto and low carb, everything, basically what food companies are doing is plugging their food full of fiber and then kind of like claiming low net carbs and things like that. Most total carbohydrate actually has like the net carb, like that is the net carb, right? Or at least the carbs that are going to affect your blood sugar. It gets really tricky. There's no regulations out there about this right now, or at least none that I could find, which makes it really, really sticky. So I always tell people, don't do the mental math, just look at that total number. If it's, what you do want things that are higher in fiber and lower in sugar, but like you can't really reasonably look at a, carton of ice cream and expect it to be low in sugar. Like that's, unless it's intentionally low sugar, that's not a thing. Right. So I think it gets really confusing. Again, the food label, the nutrition facts label is the only thing that's FDA regulated and true. So anything that says anything about low carb, net carbs, anything like that, that's not in that nutrition facts label, just ignore it. It's an advertising gimmick. It's probably true, but it's an advertising gimmick and it doesn't make that product superior. Look at the actual label. And again, don't spend more than 30 seconds looking at it because that defeats the purpose. So carbs, you have your total carb, which is really the only number you need to look at. Then you have below it things like fiber, sugar, and sugar alcohols and added sugars. This is a change that they made. I want to say it was in like 2015, 2016, and it drives me up the fucking wall. I wish they would have never done this. So they added sugar. So it used to be just total carbohydrate and it was sugar and fiber and that was it. Now they've added these added sugars as well as sugar alcohols, and it has made the whole thing massively fucking confusing. And there's no point. There's no benefit, nothing. So the fiber, I told you what fiber is. It's just a carb that your body can't digest. Sugar is obviously a carb that your body can digest. But again, just like the fats that we talked about, the total carbohydrate includes the sugar in it. So you don't need to like add the sugar on to that total carbohydrate. If you're paying attention to carbs, you just look at the total carbohydrate. And also keep in mind, the total carbohydrate does not or it does rather include starches and sugars, both of which are going to raise your blood sugar. So I think a lot of big misconception that a lot of my patients with diabetes come in with is that, oh, I need to watch sugars. So I'm going to look at the sugar on the label, not that total carb. You want to look at the total carb. Everything listed in that total carb is a carb that can raise your blood sugar. And it is not just sugars that raise your blood sugar. It is all carbs. So it is sugars and starches. Okay. So look at that total number if you are monitoring carbohydrates for like a blood sugar management situation. Do not look at just the sugars. You can look at the sugars, but again, that's just kind of like extra information. It's another layer of depth. It is not additional information, if that makes sense. And then they made it even more complicated. They have another layer of added sugars, which is all that means is that, if you're looking at something like fruit juice, for example, there's a certain amount of sugar that is going to be in apple juice no matter what you do to it, because apples have sugar in them. And then food companies go and add sugar into them. That is what is meant by the added sugars. And if you will notice, there's the amount of sugar, and then it's indented even further, and it has added sugars, right? So again, that's not telling you that there's 10 grams of sugar plus 8 grams of added sugars. What that is telling you is that of the total 10 grams of sugar, 8 were added in, whereas the other 2 were naturally occurring in the product. So that's all that's telling you. You do not need to add extra. And as far as whether, again, added sugars are one of these things that have just gotten a bad name from people who on the internet who don't know any fucking thing about nutrition. But the added sugars are not like any worse for you than regular sugar. Like, your body does not know the fucking difference. It does not matter if it is fructose from an apple, it is not, or fructose from high fructose corn syrup. Your body doesn't fucking know. It knows the amount, then that matters. But in terms of whether it is like sugar that's like, again, natural has no fucking meaning here. Okay. So like, natural sugars are not a thing. Sugar is sugar. Okay. Fructose is fructose, glucose is glucose, sucrose is sucrose. It doesn't matter where they came from. So there's no harm or additional harm from added sugars compared to just sugar, right? You want to look at the total, and you want to look at that total in the context of the total carbohydrate, because that's what's going to impact your blood sugar. But at the end of the day, it does not matter. The added sugars are not something worth paying attention to. Like I said earlier, I wish they would have never fucking added them to the food label. It's just a waste of everybody's time, and it makes it confusing. Sugar alcohols are even dumber. Sugar alcohols are like basically sweeteners, right? So they're sugars, but they've been modified in such a way that your body can't absorb them, right? So they taste very similar, but your body can't absorb them. So your body those things won't raise your blood sugar. Again, why that's on a food label, it's irrelevant information. I think at one point, like, sugar alcohols were like deemed harmful. Some people do notice that, like, with sugar alcohols, they have significant like GI issues, like it'll cause a lot of bloating or diarrhea or things like that. That said, most people tolerate them okay, in my opinion. And that said, if they're present in very small amounts, you're likely not going to notice any effect, even if you are somebody who's sensitive to them. It's going to be things like Halo Top ice cream or like sugar-free drinks and things like that, where like, that there's like a fake sugar component to it, that they're going to be present in amounts high enough to really upset your digestive system. That said, lots of people tolerate them just fine. Or certainly in like moderate quantities, they tolerate them just fine. So I think, again, that's another layer of like, that's super confusing. The sugar alcohols are not things that will raise your blood sugar, but they are a factor. Let's see. And then we kind of get into like things like, vitamins and potassium, and things like that. The FDA has kind of argued over like which vitamins should be on there and things like that. Again, that's kind of, and they're only reported in like percentages, which is, in my opinion, not super helpful. But again, you can kind of use it for a baseline as well. I think, it's important to recognize that there's no absolutes in any of this. So it's very much, when you look at a food label for a food, I don't want you to look at and be like, oh, that has high sugar, or oh, that has high fat, and oh, the high sodium, that's bad. Where is this fitting into your life, right? Like, is it a snack? Is it a meal? Is it part of a meal? Are you going to be eating the whole thing? Are you going to be eating that whole serving size? Are you going to be eating more than it? And again, you should be able to glance at it and assess all of those factors in 30 seconds or less. And if you're taking longer than 30 seconds to look at it, you're probably over analyzing it. So the last thing I want to touch on is ingredients. And this is where, oh man, the idiots of TikTok have really kind of taken over, is that they're combing through the ingredients list of things with a fine-tooth comb, trying to pick out things with little to no evidence that they're ever harmful, right? So generally speaking, the way the ingredients list work is that the ingredients that are in the food, and they're listed in order of the thing that there is the most of down to the thing that there is the least of. And you may sometimes see them like actually specify out kind of at what point it starts to become minuscule amounts. So for example, with bread as a key player, you know, unsurprisingly, flour is like the lead ingredient in bread. And then we kind of get into, you know, various types of binders, like, you know, water and eggs, or, you know, whatever, that were yeast that we're using to add bread. And then there are the things that they may be used to fortify the bread, so like the vitamins, and they might say something like less than 2%, etc., of these things for me kind of here on out. So that's kind of when you see that, like less than 2% of whatever, it just means that those things are present in very small amounts. Again, if you are like allergic to anything on there, that might be troublesome for you. But if you're not, it's kind of like this is the point at which it becomes almost obsolete to report it. That said, there's a lot of talk about, like, you know, heavy metals being present in foods, and like that's just quite simply not true. The only heavy metal that is present is like iron in the case of like a fortified breakfast cereal or something like that. So, or in the other, another big thing is something like if you can't pronounce it, it's bad for you. That's not true either. Bread and cereals and things like that are very, very often fortified with vitamins and minerals. That's why the vitamin and mineral content is so high. Like bran flakes in and of themselves don't have that much fucking iron, but you can supplement iron into it. And the reason why those things were done is because, you know, these are historically things that like the standard American diet would be deficient in. Like if you just ate, you know, a standard American diet, you probably wouldn't get enough vitamin A, you probably wouldn't get enough iron, etc. So adding it to foods that Americans eat helps to prevent those deficiencies. This, you know, it came before like supplements and things like that were really a thing, but you know, it's not a bad idea. You know, I recommend fortified foods all the time for patients who are losing weight, for patients who maybe don't have much of an appetite or aren't able to eat as much as they would like because of various GI dysfunctions. So fortified foods are not bad. Fortified just means that like some level of like synthetic vitamin has been added in, but your body still absorbs that and is able to utilize it. So, you know, things like riboflavin, niacin, and folate, etc. Like those are all things that like most people would look at and say, I can't read that, but they're vitamins. That's all it is. So it's not inherently bad. Are there preservatives and things in a lot of foods that have kind of chemically sounding names? Yes. If you all want, I'm happy to do a full episode on like key examples of that. I don't want to spend the time for it here. But that said, I'm happy to kind of take a deeper dive into it. That said, we can rest pretty assured in this country that anything is on a food label is safe for you to eat unless you have a known allergy to it. You really, you know, I don't even, to be honest with you, I don't even know what some of the misinformation is because I tune it out. But there is no one ingredient on a food label, unless you are allergic to it, that is going to create health problems for you. It's just not going to happen. Even the hydrogenated oils that were trans fats, that data was spotty at best, and you know the FDA basically pulled it from public pressure, which is fine. Like I have no qualms with that, but there's nothing on a food label that should scare you, and there's no ingredients that are bad for you unless you know you have a specific allergy or a specific intolerance. In the case of like sugar alcohols, which, to be clear, those are things that end in OL. So like xylitol, erythritol, sorbitol, etc. Those are like kind of your big sugar alcohols that sometimes give people GI distress. But again, just because you have GI distress does not mean that it's from sugar alcohols. It may be from one of 80 billion other things that can cause GI distress. So it's worth noting. But again, if you have concerns about it, go to a dietitian, talk to even potentially a doctor to get a formal diagnosis. It may not be, you know, trying to self-diagnose and standing there like agonizing over food labels is not going to fix your problem. It's just not. You need to get a clear diagnosis. You need a clear understanding of what's going on. And a dietitian may or may not be able to help with that. But, you know, if it's kind of trying to eliminate foods that are causing you grief or even identify foods that are causing you grief, a dietitian's the way to go. We truly do know our stuff. And I don't intend for this episode to sound like I'm just pushing, counseling on nutrition counseling on everyone. I'm not. But at the same time, I think it's also partly my job to defend my own profession. And the reason why we're here is that we have degrees and we have certifications and we stay up to date on research, and we have to routinely take tests to prove that. And most of the information you're getting from social media, unless it's from somebody who's a dietitian like myself, is inaccurate and not based in science, and that person doesn't know what they're talking about. Um, I have a whole master's degree level of education in nutrition, and I still don't know everything. There are things I frequently have to look up. There's research I have to refer to. And you will not convince me that somebody who's even like a personal trainer level with like a nutrition certification, no, you don't know the same amount of food that I do. And most good trainers know that. They say like, you know what, I don't know, go ask the dietitian. And a lot of trainers, I have lots of trainers in my contact list that are like, hey, I have this question about this thing, or I have a patient or a client that has a question. And that's fine, but they can teach you the basics, but they're not gonna, getting into like the nitty gritty of like scientific literature surrounding food additives is not their scope of practice. And nor is it anybody else's for that matter, but, and it is what it is. It's just the world we live in. So I think it's just, take anytime you're hearing literally anyone, even if it is a dietitian who's like giving you absolutes of like, you should never eat this, immediately scroll on, immediately delete that account. That is not information. Like no dietitian worth their salt is going to be telling you that. Again, unless you have a true allergy, in which case I have had to say that to people before. I hate saying that to people because I know how much dealing with food allergies sucks, but I would never put that on somebody unless I felt it was necessary. So, and you should not be spending more than like 30 seconds agonizing over food labels, and unless of course you do have an allergy, in which case it can be really taxing. But again, we can have another episode about that. We can have another episode about specific debunking of food additives, but I feel like this episode was full enough for now. So I will leave it at that for you all. But any further questions, just let me know. Ideas, topics, whatever, leave it in the comments. I love hearing from you guys. But otherwise, I hope you will have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will be back on track. We are back now in full, for all of our recordings to kind of resume their normal frequency. So get excited. We have a lot of fun stuff coming up for the next couple of months, and look at the Cauldron membership. Again, you get access to everything that has been archived for the low price of $50 for the rest of the year. It will go up in 2024. So looking forward to interacting and having a great last couple of months with you all. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.